All right, let's get to the games of the week presented by BetMGM. We got a big one in the AFC North this week. The Ravens and the Bengals. The Ravens are minus 2.5 in this game. This one's a monster for the Bengals, Derrik, because if they can win this game, both them and the Ravens will be 2-3. And even after that 0-3 start, they will have kind of clawed their way back into the AFC North conversation in a year where we're still not entirely sure about the Steelers. We know the Browns probably aren't very good. The problem, though, is that they are playing a Ravens team that I think figured it out a little bit last week against the Bills.
I think they certainly figured it out a little bit last week, and I'm shocked the line is only at about 2.5 or something. I think
That seems low, huh?
it seems really low. Maybe they're still baking in some of the early season weirdness of the Ravens, but I think last
It was a
week,
division game. These games are
yeah,
usually close when these two teams play, but on paper, it feels like this Ravens team is a pretty bad matchup for what the Bengals are trotting out there right now.
yeah, and it's a lot like last week where the Bills team, they're a good team, but the one thing that they've been really, really bad at this year is defending the run. And obviously they've lost some guys and they don't have everybody in the front seven that they want. But the Bengals run defense, we came into the year saying they might be one of the worst in the league, and they absolutely have been. They are bottom five in success rate, and they have been a really, really bad tackling team. Well, now you're going up against Lamar Jackson, who looks faster and quicker than he has in your past. You're going up against Derrick Henry, who is one of the toughest tackles basically for like the last decade or so. And so now I mean, just look at what he did against the Cowboys, where it seemed like every run he was just throwing somebody to the ground. So I think this game has a very high chance to look a lot like that one. And, you mentioned division games kind of looking scrappy and always being dirty and stuff like that. A big reason why the Bengals have had some degree of success against Baltimore the past few years with Lou Anarumo is like, okay, if we can get the Ravens in pure pass, we can throw some of our simulateds, we can do some of that stuff and kind of confuse Lamar Jackson. Okay, well, if the Ravens are going to run for 6.5 yards a pop, you're just not going to be in those situations, and it just doesn't matter.
It was the same conversation we had last week. If the Bills can get them in those scenarios, the Bills pass defense, even with a bunch of backups in there, you feel okay about it. The Bills run defense, you feel less okay. I looked it up today because I was curious what sort of challenge that new look Ravens offensive line faced last week against Buffalo. How many pure drop back plays do you think the Ravens had last week against the Bills?
I mean, what they have 18 total, so like half of them were true drop back, maybe.
6. They
Oh,
had
no way.
6 pure dropbacks against the Bills last week. So Roger Rosengarten, who was playing, had his first start last week at right tackle, he looked good on the 4 plays where he was asked to actually block somebody. He looked very good, but I think it's important to think about how that game was played and the style that the Ravens got to enjoy. And I think there is a chance against this Bengals team we'll see something similar. And if they're in that mode where it's 1st and 10, it's 2nd and 3, and they can just consistently line up with heavy bodies and run the ball down the Bengals' throat, I think it's going to be a really bad time for Cincinnati. Like you mentioned, they've been one of the worst run defenses in the league. The tackling is what's jumped out to me, and there's like the total lack of physicality. That's the number one aspect that I would be thinking about coming into this game, is that the physicality gap between the Ravens offense and the Bengals defense right now is about as big as you can get. Cincinnati has given up 460 yards rushing after contact this year, which is 30th in the NFL.
Like, where Derrick Henry does a lot of his damage? It's
Yes.
after he makes one guy, like, just throws one guy into the dirt and then starts to run away from everybody else. I mean, like I said, we saw that the past 2 weeks where he just makes one guy, puts him in the ground on the perimeter, and then he's gone for 30 yards.
The Bengals over the last couple of years, they've played a lot of nickel when the Ravens have been in 12 personnel. And when the Ravens have lined up with 2 tight ends this year, they've absolutely stomped people. 26 carries, 171 yards, 65% rushing success rate. According to True Media, they're averaging 3.7 yards before contact on those plays. And the Bengals have played nickel 212, 65% of the time this year, and they played it 80% of the time against the Ravens last year. So I just think there are so many different areas where if Baltimore, again, like last week against the Bills, are allowed to play the game that they want to play, it's going to be really hard for the Bengals to even be like a speed bump as part of that process.
Allowed to play the game they want to play is the perfect way to frame this, because some of the questions I had early in the year about Baltimore's offense, I don't think have been solved. Like, what do they look like in pure pass situations? Do I really trust their pass catching room? Like, do I like how it's built? Okay, but that doesn't matter if, like we said, in these games, you can just get to a spot where you were consistently ahead of the sticks, you were consistently converting on the ground and really getting explosives on the ground. I think that's the big thing, is that they're not just an efficient rushing offense where they can stay in good down and distances. No, Lamar Jackson can go get 15 at a time. Like Derrick Henry can go rip off an 87-yard run to start a game. Like they can get their big plays on the ground, which is kind of unique. Like there just aren't that many teams who can get these huge, huge plays in the ground game. And if Cincinnati's going to be as bad tackling as they have been for the first month of the season, there's a good chance we get 3 or 4 of those runs in this game.
I'm so happy that we're allowed to enjoy the Lamar Jackson Derrick Henry pairing because there was a moment early in the season when it's like, oh man, we really right to be this pumped up about it? Is Derrick Henry over the hill? Like, what is this actually going to look like? And the fact that it is as cool as we wanted it to be really warms my soul because if it had gone the other way, I would have been pretty bummed out.
It's one of my favorite things of the season, dude, because these are my two favorite players to watch, even when they were on separate teams, like Lamar Jackson, especially now that again I've said it like 6 different times, but he is quicker and faster than he was in the past couple years. You add that on top of Derrick Henry, who I think people last year maybe because efficiency wise it wasn't as good as it had been in years past that they were kind of off Derrick Henry, but if you watch him, it was like, hey man, he's still got something to him, and now you add him to this Baltimore team, these two, it's like you said, for a minute there, it looked like maybe it wouldn't be as cool as we wanted. But I think we are now fully in the spot where, like, yeah, the two of the most unique runners in the NFL side by side, it's really sick.
Couple personnel things to point out. Obviously, the Bengals front is still banged up. Trey Hendrickson's dealing with an injury. He's really been their only pass rusher who's done anything so far this year. So if he can't play in this game or he's severely limited like he was last week, that's a huge concern. And the guy he's going against, Ronnie Stanley's looking a little Ronnie Stanley-ish over the first 4 games of the year, which is huge news for the Ravens. He's been really good. And I alluded to this a little bit before. I'm not making light of the Roger Rosengarten thing. I actually do think he played well last week. And so now I'm wondering, what is the best 5 offensive linemen for the Ravens? We spent so much time talking about this coming into the season. So now Rosengarten was at right tackle last week, and McCary was at left guard because Andrew Voorhees was hurt. Voorhees is still a little bit banged up, but I think he's probably going to be able to play in this game. It's not the most important thing, but I'm just wondering over the course of this year, how do the Ravens settle on their best 5 guys? And I probably feel better about the answer to that than I did before the season, and especially after what they look like in week 1.
So, are you kind of like full steam ahead with Rosengarten at right tackle, and then it's just a matter of which guy do you want to sort out at left guard? Like, does that feel like where they're at?
I don't know. I mean, that's probably the best answer based on what he put on tape last week. But again, there was 6 pure dropback situations, and I think on 2 of them he had chip help. He looked good when being asked to. He had a couple one-on-ones against Von Miller, and he did look okay. He didn't look like he was out of his depth at all, but it's still very, very early. We just haven't gotten a big look at him yet. So I probably want a little bit more information before I'm going to make a final determination on that. But it's just something I'm keeping my eye on. On the other side, Cam Taylor-Britt was benched last week. I don't think I realized that in real time. He was getting cooked in that game against Carolina, and the Bengals actually put in DJ Turner, and DJ Turner looks significantly better against the Panthers than Cam Taylor-Britt did. So we're mentioning the issues that the Bengals are having with their run defense, but there are issues with them defending everything right now.
Yeah, they've been a bad defense overall, and I know like Cam Taylor-Britt had that sick one-handed catch. But other than him kind of bullying people at the line of scrimmage, he has not played all that well this year. So it's kind of not. I mean, it's kind of surprising he got benched, but I mean, the way that he was playing in that game, it kind of makes sense. I still have so many question marks about the Ravens receiving core that I don't know if that's where they're going to win this game anyway. I still think it's going to be mostly in the run game. But really, I think if the Ravens are what we think they're going to be in the run game, they just have to be good enough in the passing game. And truthfully, some of the Ravens' best passing plays or most effective and most explosive passing plays this year have just been Lamar kind of dancing around for 3.5 seconds and he finds Zay Flowers. This Bengals defense isn't very disciplined right now, and I think there's a very good chance they can
And can't get pressure.
right, and they can't get home. Like Jackson's going to have those 3.5, 4 seconds to just bounce around and do some of the stuff that he does. So there's a pretty decent chance I think him and Flowers connect on some 1 or 2 big plays down the field just on that.
Before we move on, I want to at least acknowledge the possibility that we have a couple throwback moments for the Bengals defense in this game. Think about how many times over the last 3-4 years when Amarumo's been there, they've dropped somebody off the line of scrimmage, they've caught Lamar, they've gotten a turnover. I think they're going to need a couple of those plays in order to keep pace in this game. If they're not going to make a couple splashes, take the ball away a couple times, down to down, I think they got their work cut out for them. Let's get to the other side of the ball here. The Bengals offense has looked legitimately good the last couple of weeks. I've actually really enjoyed watching a lot of the stuff that they're doing. There's some route combinations in that game last week against Carolina. Now they got T. Higgins back. Chase Brown's doing some fun stuff, just being really explosive. Amarius Mims played last week. I think Joe Burrow is really settling in. It's like, okay, this is the Bengals offense that I expected to see. They're also trying to tweak a couple things, and they're trying a few new wrinkles, which we can get into a little bit. But just as I'm starting to build some optimism about where the Bengals offense can take them this year, they are now running into a Ravens defense that, again, I do think figured out some stuff and clicked into some stuff last week against the Bills that they can take moving forward here.
It really does feel like they have. And it feels like this was going to happen, right? The players are too good. Some of the stars are too good, and they've been too good for too long that it felt like eventually they were going to find their footing. It was just a matter of, is it going to be a month? Is it going to be 2 months? Is it going to be 11 weeks? Like, what was it going to be? I think to do what they did against the Bills last week was hugely impressive, and I really think they've a little bit found what they want to be over the middle of the field a little bit. Like I said early in the year, it felt like Roquan Smith wasn't quite up to his standard as a middle of the field defender. And I think last week was a better showing in that on that front. And then I think kind of what we said coming into the year, the biggest question we had with this Ravens defense, were they going to get to the passer and kind of let the back seven do what they needed to do? I would say they've been, not an elite unit by any stretch, but they have been more than good enough for this defense to, I think, get to where they want to be. So I'm pretty happy with it.
It's so funny because I think we focused so much coming into the season about, okay, could Owe really take a step forward and become a guy? And he's been good this year. I do think that there are flashes for him that are really encouraging. We know what Matabike can be at his best. He got the payday this offseason. He was really good last year. But the two guys I think that have probably put me on notice the most, just I'm rewatching these games, be like, oh shit, like this guy's really bringing something right now, are probably Kyle Van Noy and Travis Jones. So the fact that we can add both of those guys to the equation and they're consistently making impact plays, and you know what Matabike is, and always giving you pretty much what you were hoping for, now you're building a case for why this can be a consistently disruptive unit over the course of the year.
And Travis Jones, it's not that crazy. You saw some of the flashes last year. He's a young
Totally.
player. You could kind of expect some sort of jump. Super talented, super big, super explosive. But Kyle Van Noy, I mean, we're like a decade into it with this guy, and he's playing some of the best ball that he's ever played purely as a pass rusher. It's incredible.
This is just a yearly thing for the Ravens. I mean, it was a little bit of Van Noy, but mostly Clowney last year. It's
Mhm.
almost like a Highlander thing where like there can only be one breakout veteran pass rusher on the Ravens every single season, and this year it gets to be Kyle Van Noy. So very happy for him. You mentioned the Ravens figuring it out over the middle of the field, and something that jumped out to me last week when I was yesterday when I was rewatching the game against the Bills was how much dime defense that they were playing and how I actually think that might be the best deployment of their players in defined passing situations. And I didn't remember them playing a lot of dime last year. And I looked up the numbers. Last season, the Ravens played 12 snaps of dime personnel the entire year. It was 1% of total plays, which was the 30th highest rate in the NFL. This year, they've already played it 58 times. And that's really mostly over the last 2 weeks. Over the past 2 weeks, they've played dime on 42.5% of their snaps. And they have a 67% success rate on those plays. And why I think this is important. One, if you're playing against 11 personnel team, which the Bengals are a little bit less now, we could talk about, but they still want to be that way. You're fine. You can play dime. You can put those bodies on the field. But the Ravens version of dime puts Marlon Humphrey in the slot, which is where I think he's best. I think some of the volatility that we see from him is mostly on the outside. When he can line up on the inside, I think that's the best version of him right now. Well, if he's going to be in the slot, what do you do with Kyle Hamilton if you want to bring him closer to the ball? The answer has been you put him at linebacker next to Roquan Smith. So I think that combination with like our Darius Washington or Eddie Jackson as that third safety, and you have Brandon Stevens and Nate Wiggins on the outside, I think that's the Ravens' best 11. On 3rd and 7, I think that is the best 11 guys that they can put out there. And it's fun to kind of watch them figure that out after having done almost none of this last year.
I think that's a really great point. And especially, you bring up the on 3rd and 7, this is their best personnel. I would imagine part of why they've run so much down the past 2 weeks is they are just boat racing teams. And the other team has
Yeah,
to be
that's
in pure
true.
pass.
Yes.
And so it makes sense to be in dime. But even with that in mind, like that doesn't always happen for teams that are super ahead. And I think kind of to your point, part of the reason they do it is like, okay, us putting Kyle Hamilton down in the box and taking Trenton Simpson off the field is a better overall structure for our defense. Because I think Simpson, really, really good athlete, but he is not the coverage guy that Patrick Queen was last year. And I don't think
Just
he is.
earlier in his career,
Yeah,
right? He's still
exactly.
very green. He hasn't played much football, and teams are picking on him to an extent.
Exactly. This isn't a he's never going to do it. It's just a right now, 3-4 weeks into the season, you're a young guy, you're starting for your first time. Whereas, obviously Patrick Queen had been in the system, been on the team for a long time and got to play next to Roquan Smith for a long time. It's just a different type of guy. And so I think it makes a lot of sense for them to be like, all right, let's just put our two best players next to each other in the middle of the field, and that'll solve all of our problems.
It's fun to watch the Bengals figure out their own stuff. Every single year, it seems like they try to add something. And that's why I find myself quietly rooting for the Bengals offense each year, because they're at least trying to solve problems and at least trying to take things in new directions, even if there are some guardrails on it because of the way their quarterback wants to play. This year, two things have stood out to me. One, they're running 12 personnel with the fourth highest rate in the league this season. It's 29% of their plays. They were at 12% last year, which was 27th in the league. And why I think that's even more important is I think Eric All is kind of a player. Their rookie tight end, he was a fourth round pick. He's a good athlete. He's clearly has some juice as a pass catcher. And I think they're using him as a blocker in some interesting ways. He's not a physical force or anything, but he's willing. And I think that it's allowed them to create some fun angles in the run game. He's lined up as a fullback, as an H-back. So I like the poking and the prodding they're doing in that area. And the other thing that they're doing, which I think smart offenses are leaning into just as a way to dictate personnel, they're using 6 offensive linemen a lot more. They've done that on 19 plays so far this year. They did it 41 times all of last season. So again, it's another year where I'm paying attention to and appreciating the fact that the Bengals are trying to take this thing in a new direction, at least a little bit.
Yeah, All is interesting because he was a guy who clearly had something to him in college, just had a huge injury
Where did he
problem.
go? This is something you would know
Iowa.
that I'm okay.
Iowa.
Oh, there
Yeah.
you
And
go.
so it's just a matter of, is he going to be healthy enough to be the guy that he had looked like when he was, fully healthy a couple years ago? And it seems like the early answer is yeah. And you mentioned he's not necessarily the biggest or strongest blocker, but save for the guys who are like Kittle or Gronk, you really just need to be a guy who, kind of like you said, just really get after it, be violent, and make sure you get enough of a pop there. I think he certainly clears that bar. And then I think what makes him the most interesting is he actually gives you a little bit of juice in the passing game, whereas every other Bengals tight end in the Joe Burrow era has pretty much been a guy who only blocks or can catch short and doesn't do anything after the catch, or is just purely a run in space yards after catch guy
Yeah,
like Irv Smith
it's
or Mike Gesicki.
Gesicki. Yeah.
Yes, it's one of those guys.
Gesicki or Drew Sample. Like those are the guys we've
Right.
got. Even Tanner Hudson, who I kind of like, is really just a pass catcher. Like he's not giving you much as a blocker. So the fact that they have somebody who could do a little bit of both, that is nice.
And even Hudson is just a check down guy, and he's a really good one. He's actually been very effective in that role, but that's pretty much all he's got. So the fact that All is starting to let them live in a little bit of this other world, I think is interesting. And then I do think it's cool that you bring up how much 6 offensive lineman stuff they've been doing, how much 12 they've been doing, because they've really, really leaned into this under center run game as a big portion of their offense, and they've been pretty effective at it. I mean, obviously the blocking has looked a little bit better, but you brought up Chase Brown earlier. I like him. I wasn't sure where I felt about him coming into the season, how much could he really be a lead back, but his vision, his pacing, some of his explosive ability, it's given this offense a little bit of something.
Him and Moss is okay. And I think the
okay,
offense
yes.
is doing a lot of encouraging stuff. They've played against Washington and Carolina the last 2 weeks, who are, I think, objectively probably 2 of the worst 5 defenses in the league. Washington's numbers are there. Carolina's not quite, but it's a talent-free unit for the most part. So this will be a very different challenge for Cincinnati's offense playing against these Ravens this week. One area where I do think it would make sense for them to lean into it. Against the Chiefs, this stuck out, and then against Buffalo a little bit. The Ravens have had issues with teams going empty against them this year. And you mentioned how Roquan Smith hasn't really been the superhero we're used to seeing. The Ravens are 27th in the league in EPA per dropback against empty this year. 50% of opponent attempts out of empty have gone for first downs against them, which is 31st in the NFL. And what do the Bengals like to do? A decent amount. They're happy to live that way. So I think spreading them out, trying to play a little bit of ball control, actually do think makes a little bit of sense for where Cincinnati is right now and where this Ravens defense is right now.
That probably is the best way to attack them, because I do think last week was a nice step for the Ravens in that regard on defense. You still got to prove it to me for more than 1 week. And then, like you said, the Bengals really, for as long as Burrow has been there have been one of the best empty passing teams in the league, and they obviously did a lot of it last week. So that probably is a good way to attack them. I still think they need to find explosives somehow. Like I think just doing a lot of this quick passing and efficient running isn't going to quite be enough against this Ravens team, but it's certainly a
They're at
good
least
baseline.
trying, though. They're
Yes,
at
yeah.
least trying to push the ball downfield, and that's what's encouraging to me is you've seen Burrow over the last couple of weeks when he's got one-on-ones, he's trying to take those shots. He ripped like a Dak-esque seam ball to
Oh,
Yoshivas
that
last week
one
over
was
the middle
so
of the
good.
field. That was beautiful, and he had another, like, big in-breaker to Jamar at one point. I do like the ambition that he is showing, especially when you contrast it to what they looked like in week 1 against New England. Like, I was watching that game, I'm like, "Man, this is worrisome." If he's going to be this conservative in where he's going with the ball, and I think he is not too quick to check it down, but he'll take it when it's there. But seeing him kind of counteract that and counterbalance that with some shots down the field and with some of these more ambitious throws, it's nice to see because I was worried we were not even going to get this version of him at any point this year. And the fact that we got it by week 4, I'm happy about that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think week 1, it looked like it wasn't gonna be there at all. It's
Oof.
very nice that there's a little bit more of it now. Again, I wanna see it against a good defense like Baltimore this
It's
week, but
totally fair.
at least they've put it on tape, and that's a good start.
Let's get to our next one here. The Bills and the Texans. The Bills are -1 in this game. And for Buffalo, I think that, especially their defense, and after what the Ravens did to them last week, you could construe this as, oh man, you had to play Baltimore last week, and now you have to play against this Texans offense this week. And I actually am not seeing it that way because I think where the Ravens offense was a terrible matchup for this state of the Bills. You got backups at linebacker. You're struggling to defend the run. You're kind of inflexible in the way that your defense feels. I actually think that the current state of the Texans is not well positioned to take advantage of that at all. So even if we got star power on the other side, and we're going to talk a million times about the Stephon Diggs part of this, I think that Buffalo actually has a chance to get back on track a little bit in this game.
I big time agree. Because that Ravens team, they are uniquely designed to beat the shit out of like the exact team that Buffalo is right now, just in terms of where they're struggling with the run game with their front. Like,
Even where the way they throw the ball. It's like
yes,
they can take advantage of a Bale Inspector when throwing the football. Like, God bless Bale Inspector, but he was not up to snuff against this version of the Ravens.
yes, exactly. Like, I think this Buffalo team is great, and they ran into the one team that is just completely built to give them issues. And that's going to happen in the NFL, right? Like, you can't be built to beat every single team necessarily, and that's just the way it goes. But in this matchup, no, I totally agree. The way that you want to beat this Bills team right now is to be able to run the ball on them and to stay into a lot of favorable down and distances where Sean McDermott can't just let his secondary clamp down on everything. I just don't think that that's going to be the case because I think for 3 weeks now we've seen that the Texans can't run the ball, and I don't think they've been schematically an interesting team running the ball. I think blocking wise they've been bad. We even talked about it, like just little things like not having Brevin Jordan on the field have gone a long way. Like it's just all these 800 different adding factors where they can't run the ball well, and it's the one thing you need to do to get this Bills team out of their comfort zone.
We kind of alluded to this when we were talking about the Texans after the week 4 game. We said, Joe Mixon isn't going to solve everything here. I would like to back off that take a tiny bit because Cam Akers has not been it. When you go back and watch some of this stuff, it's not like the line is getting great movement. And I totally agree with you that just all of the zone runs, it's not compelling to me. Like when you compare that to all the very cool, flexible kind of layered run games in the NFL, what the Texans are doing right now, I think is pretty bland and boring. But the fact that they have a back who's compounding those problems when Mixon, I think, would at least get the most out of what's blocked, I think that's making it even worse. And right now, they are dead last. We mentioned this on the recap show on Sunday. They are dead last in rushing success rate since week 1. I think that's a little bit up front. I think that's a little bit design. And I think that the running back probably carries some of the blame for that as well.
I do think getting Mixon back will help them. I don't know if him
He
making
may not be
them.
back.
Yeah, I just even if he is, I just don't know if him making them like 7% better by success rate fixes all of what's wrong here.
I'm with you on that. I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that Cam Akers has not been good and is part of the issue. And the other part of this is that you watched the Ravens last week and what they were doing to the Bills. And it's all these just downhill physical gap scheme runs. They're pulling people and just really taking it to a Buffalo defense that's not really equipped to deal with that. But if all of these Texans runs are going to be side to side kind of lateral runs, you're not really hurting this Bills team where you'd be able to do it. There was a play, I have to talk about it because it's stuck in my mind. There was a play in that game where Ricard is lined up as a fullback. And so he's leading up to the left, and Falalele is pulling. And I think it was Dewan Smoot to that side. And I'm poor Dewan Smoot. So both of those guys have like a running start, and they get to Smoot at the exact same time.
Oh,
So
heaven.
it's an inadvertent double team with a head start, with a head of steam, and they just wipe him off the side of the face of the earth. And that's not what this Texans team is. This Texans team is kind of on the other side of the spectrum when running the football right now, and that's why I think that the Bills are much more equipped to kind of keep pace with where this Houston team is.
That is such a good point because yes, this Ravens team, it's not even just that the Bills have been not a very good run defense. It's that the only thing they're good at is kind of to your point. They can run side to side. These backers, even the backups, are actually pretty good athletes. They can run side to side. And then what is even a guy like Ed Oliver? What is he really good at? It's like, okay, he can shoot gaps and he can get through. When you double team him, it doesn't look as good. That is
They're
kind of
undersized. They just
yes,
don't have a
exactly.
lot of bulk, period.
Yeah,
Even
exactly.
when
They just don't have
Bernard
big
might be
dudes.
back this week, and even Bernard, it's like he's undersized. It's an undersized defense that wants to live in nickel. And so that's why running downhill at them is the answer, and the Texans just aren't equipped to do that.
It's like almost the opposite of like how the Saints have built their defensive line. They're like their front for the longest time, where it's like we're just going to get the biggest, longest defensive ends. We're going to get backers who can hit, and like the Bills have kind of been the inverse of that. And so yeah, the best way to attack a team like that is to run at them, to get pullers, to get double teams. The Texans have been one of the biggest outside zone run teams in the NFL this year, and they haven't really experimented with a lot of other stuff. And so if this is the game they do it, cool, great, good on them. But until I see it, it's hard for me to believe that that's where we're going to be.
We've talked about the Texans' run game issues, and I think that we both acknowledge them. And your skepticism about their passing game, I wasn't sure if I shared the same doubts, through 4 weeks. I was like, it hasn't been great, but they'll be fine. And then I went back and rewatched some, and then I was starting to look at some of the numbers. And it actually is, I think there are some underlying issues that I probably wasn't recognizing quite enough. And the number that stuck out to me, CJ Stroud's been great with play action. He's like a top 6 quarterback with all the efficiency metrics with play action. On non-play action throws, which become important when you're facing a lot of third and longs in the way that this team is. Here are the guys who have a worse EPA per dropback on non-play action than CJ Stroud, who've started at least 3 games this year. Caleb Williams, Deshaun Watson, Anthony Richardson, Sam Darnold. That's one for the discourse. We'll get to that later. And Will Levis. That's it. Those are the 5 guys. That is troubling.
It's all young guys and bad players for the most part.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure, CJ Stroud's a young guy, but he's not a bad player. I'm very certain of that.
So what do you make of this? Like, where do you think these shortcomings beyond the run game, when they're throwing the ball with a quarterback that we all are very excited about, what is missing right now in your mind?
I think the biggest issue is they just end up in way, way too many of these down and distances where it's very obvious pass. And when you get into obvious pass, almost all of what they do as a passing offense is like, all right, we're going to get 4 or 5 out in the concept. It's going to be all intermediate stuff. And CJ Stroud pick a side and go throw the dig route. And it's like, cool, he can do that when that's all that you're doing as a passing offense. And you're not getting that many guys like really good running starts with motion. And you're not, getting into bunches and getting guys open easily that way, which I think they've struggled with. I think it just puts so much stress on the quarterback. And again, he's been good. It's just that when you're asking him to live this way in constant 2nd and 9s and 3rd and 11s and all that stuff, it's just hard. The other thing with CJ Stroud too, I looked this up on NFL Pro, or it was one of their like game insights. CJ Stroud has a 64.1% completion rate on throws under pressure. That's the 3rd best in the league. However, he's under pressure all of the time. And so those plays are inherently less effective and less productive because you're just under pressure. A lot of them end up being checkdowns and stuff. So they just have a lot of, I think, structural issues that trickle down from just not being a good, like, 1st and 10 team.
Let's get to the other side of the ball here. I went back and rewatched that Bills-Ravens game, and I might just be coping here after the love fest that we had for Josh Allen and the Bills offense going into last week, but I actually still feel really good about where the Bills offense is. They still did a lot of really good stuff. I love what they're doing in the run game. Again, they just faced a Ravens defense that really was clicking. The number that jumped out to me, and I think it speaks to the tackling from the Ravens, the Bills were coming into that game averaging 7.2 yards after catch per reception, which was second highest in the league. In that game, it was at 3.7, which over the course of the year would be 31st in the NFL. So a lot of the stuff that they were doing, just getting the ball in guys' hands, letting them go to work, the Ravens did such a great job of limiting those sorts of plays. And again, combined with the fact that they're up 2 touchdowns and that balanced version of the Bills offense that we'd really seen over the first 4 weeks, where they're running the ball extremely efficiently. James Cook looks great. You start to chip away at that a little bit. So overall, I still feel very good about where the Bills are. And I actually think that this Texans defense, even though there are a lot of players that we like on this group, and I think the results are fine right now, I think that they're scrambling for some answers in ways that I probably underrated before digging into it a little bit.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Bills not being able to play their balanced offense. I think the way that they wanted to against Baltimore, obviously, because being behind on the scoreboard. I just don't think that that's going to be a problem in this game. I think they're going to be able to keep pace and even probably be ahead for a lot of this game and be able to be the offense that they want to be. I think not even just on the scoreboard, but like they're going to be able to run the ball better on this Texans team than I think they were able to last week against the Ravens for large parts of that game, and that's going to help Josh Allen get into the passing situations he wants. It's going to allow the Bills to do a lot of the motion and stuff they want to do. Because the truth of the matter is, I know everybody loves motion, but like can't really do a lot of motion stuff if you're in 2nd and 11 or 3rd and 7 when they know you want to throw anyway. Like it just part of the value in motion is are they running or are they passing? And that doesn't really work as well when they know you're passing. But I just don't think that that's going to be a problem in this game. So I think it is going to be a good test for a Texans defense that hasn't been bad. Like I don't think there have been like just letting teams do whatever they want against them, but they have not taken the step I think that we were both kind of hoping that they could. And what's most confusing to me is per NFL Pro, Daniil Hunter and Will Anderson are third and fourth respectively in pressure rate. That was the thing that like if I told you that before going into the season, you would think the Texans were an elite defense. But they have that and they haven't been an elite defense. And so it's frustrating that they've gotten the thing they wanted out of their stars and the rest of it just hasn't fallen into place.
I think that's the issue, is that pretty much everything outside of those two guys and Derek Stingley feels like a question mark right now. And I think you can sense that a little bit with how the Texans are trying to play. Two numbers jump out to me. One, they're playing with a loaded box, so more defenders than blockers in the box on 40% of first downs. That is the fourth highest rate in the league. And if you think about what the Niners were when D'Amico Ryans was there, they're playing a lot of like quarter shells and trying to defend the run out of that. I don't think they want to be devoting that many resources to stopping the run. But right now, because of some of the issues and the question marks with the interior defensive line and with the linebackers, they're having to do that. So they're playing with a lot of bodies stuffed up near the line of scrimmage, and they're still only 15th in run defense success rate. So again, it feels like they're just kind of grasping for answers there. And I think it extends to other areas too. They are ninth in blitz rate overall. They're blitzing on 51% of third downs. That's the second highest rate in the league. The Falcons and them are like right there, neck and neck, 1 and 2. And it's actually working. Like their blitz game is disgusting. They're sending some really cool pressures at people, and I actually really enjoy watching it. And it's been effective. But I guess my question is like, do we think D'Amico Ryans wants to play this way, or do we think he's playing this way because he feels like there's some shortcomings in personnel that he's trying to overcome?
I think it's the latter. I think D'Amico Ryans feels like he has to fix something. And you do make a good point. When they do it, they are awesome at it. That's been true of D'Amico Ryans. Last year, it was true when he was in San Francisco. Like when he wants to bring his pressures, he's going to do an awesome job of putting guys in the right spots. It's just doing it that often, I don't think is the way that he wants to live. I think he wants to be a little bit more sound in the back end. It's just I think they are sending so much pressure and even to a different extent, loading up the box as much as they are in the run game is because like they want to be in safer, like in terms of loading the box, I think they're trying to stop the run so that they can be in safer passing downs, so it's easier on their secondary. And then when it does get to these some of these passing downs on third down, they're like, all right, let's just throw a bunch of bodies at the problem, hope that these secondary guys only have to cover for 2 seconds instead of 2.75. And I think that's the reason they're throwing so many bodies at the problem.
It makes a lot of sense because I think outside of Stingley, and then Petrie's had some really nice moments. I actually
Mhm.
like him in the slot. I think that move makes sense for him. But we move beyond those two guys. Kalen Bullock has struggled a little bit, especially when isolated. Like the Jags were trying to get him or Eric Murray isolated on their number 3 receiver often last week, and that was an advantage for the Jags. Like Christian Kirk was doing some cooking, and Jacksonville just was unable to take advantage of it. So I think the safeties have been a little bit of a problem, and Kamari Lassiter, even though there's been some flashes to feel good about, when you can get him working in space, so away from the boundary, I think we see some of the athleticism concerns in the youth show up. And so if the Bills can consistently do that, which is what they want to do, think about all those crossers. Think about how they want to attack you. I actually think the way the Bills passing game is constructed right now is going to put some of those DBs that we're worried about in pretty precarious spots.
That's a great point about the Bills offense and how they want to build it. Like they want to get into condensed stuff and they want to like motion all their guys around and shift them around and make you uncomfortable. It's not like last year's, Seahawks offense where they're just in these like spread out formations. You got two guys outside the numbers. Like that's just not how it operates. And I think that is probably where you're going to catch this Texans secondary if you can get them.
Few injury things to mention here. We mentioned that Bernard has been limited in practice, might be back. Teron Johnson, same sort of deal. So that would go a long way if we can get both of those guys back as part of the equation here. Those second level and spine concerns that crept up against the Ravens matter a little bit less if they're on the field. And then for the Texans, chance we get Tank Dell back in this game, which, like you mentioned, little speed, you add a little juice to that offense. What does that do for the passing game? And then Jimmy Ward was limited. So him stepping back in for Murray solves that to a degree. So a lot of important players potentially coming back from injury for both of these teams. Let's get to this week's fourth screen. This is from Kevin Levine, and I'm going to read this whole thing because I think Kevin did a great job with it. It's a little long, but you guys will see why in a second. He said, Robert, before my submission for this week's fourth screen email, some backstory. I live in upstate South Carolina, about an hour south of Asheville, North Carolina. While not as bad as what was happening in Western Carolina, we still had a pretty shitty weekend. I was woken at 6:07 a.m. Friday by the transformer outside my window blowing as I lost power. By 7, my fence had blown over and my basement was flooding. But it was just after 8 when the day went from bad to worse as the tree next to my driveway was uprooted and came crashing down on the house, taking part of the chimney and the side porch with it. Saturday and Sunday were a blur, cleaning the yard, trying to fix the car that now wouldn't start, finding food, and heading into town to charge devices and contact insurance. Monday was spent cleaning out the moldy food from the fridge and freezer and begging tree companies to come get this tree off my house as we start to see the cracks in the ceiling, to no avail. As late afternoon rolls around, I sit in my car to charge my phone and listen to the Monday recap show, prepping for Monday Night Football. I throw on my Tua jersey as all my other Finn's gears in the laundry, I'm unable to clean without getting power back, and begin aimlessly walking around my property, desperate to find a place with enough service to stream the game. With 5 minutes to spare, I find this lone spot in my front yard that does the trick. He sent a picture of him streaming the game, holding up his phone in the yard, and his wife took this picture. So my wife wasn't thrilled to open the front door and find me looking like an idiot to the entire neighborhood, but she snapped a pic anyway for a family group chat to have a quick laugh at my expense. A step to my right or left loses signal, as does sitting down, but I don't care because for just a few short hours, I can forget about everything else going on and focus on the Dolphins as they try to right the ship against the Tennessee Titans. Isn't that what football is all about? Letting us forget all our troubles and bringing us together over this great sport. So did I really care about how poorly they played? Abso-fucking-lutely I did. Any Dolphins fan forced through that game should be entitled to reparations for time wasted, which brings me to my submission for this week's fourth screen, as we are in for a slog with Tyler Huntley and this happily Miami offense against Jacoby Brissett and the Patriots. I know we all hope by this point Miami would be firing on all cylinders and Drake May would have taken the reins in New England, firing bullets to every part of the field like we all know he can. But instead we get this, a game more likely to end without a touchdown than with serious hope for either team. I've been a Dolphins fan since 2001 and have yet to see a playoff victory, and it looks further away now than ever. At this point, a dart match between Allen and Mahomes would have more entertainment value. Alas, this Sunday at 1 p.m., with or without power, you will find me somewhere, some way, with the screen showing the Miami Dolphins, as I hope without reason that something changes. And you should join me, because that's what this game is about, giving us hope beyond all reason that things will be different as we get 4 hours a week to forget our troubles and cheer on our team. Sincerely, someone who doesn't know what they want more, his power back or a Miami victory.
I love this one because the whole thing is about trying to find a silver lining in all of this. And then realizing that with this Dolphins game, there is no silver lining other than just ignoring everything else in life. But that's not really a silver lining.
I want to tell Kevin thank you and just tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to send that after everything that you're going through. I hope that you guys have had a little bit better luck over the last couple of days. The fact that you would be listening to the Monday recap show in your car as you were dealing with all that stuff, I cannot tell you how much that means to us. So I'm sorry you're dealing with what you're dealing with, both with the Dolphins and everything else that's going on in your life. But thank you for taking the time to send that because it really does mean a lot. So that was a really, really good one. All right, let's dig into this a little bit. We wanted to just kind of take a second, take a step back, take a breath, and dig into what the Steelers were doing with Justin Fields because there have been some really exciting moments from him as a passer. And I think that the most interesting conclusion both of us kind of came to is that whatever the Steelers offense was supposed to be coming into the year with Justin Fields, it's something different right now.
It is very different. And like, it's funny because structurally, they are trying to be the thing that we wanted them to be, which is run the ball a lot. We're going to try to boot. We're going to try to throw down the field a little bit on some of these play action concepts. And they've tried to be that. But in terms of what the team is actually good at, it's not that at all. They've been a really bad rushing team. Justin Fields like hasn't really given them that many of the explosives that you thought they were going to get, whether it's down the field or with his legs. Um, he's actually been like a kind of good early down passer though, and like a good pure dropback passer. Like in terms of pure dropback without play action or without screens, Justin Fields is fifth in EPA per play on early downs.
Fifth?
Fifth. And so some of that is he's had some really good third down plays, but even if you drop it to just first and second downs, without play action or without screens, he's 13th, which isn't great, but that is considerably better than the kind of player that he was beforehand. And I think that there's a few reasons for this. One, I think Arthur Smith has actually done a fairly good job of kind of paring down the offense to fit what he does well. It's been a lot of boots, a lot of like two-man concepts, a lot of flood. Like they'll just throw everything at one side of the
Yeah.
field and be like, all right, buddy, it's going to come back into your vision. Just throw it. And I think he's done good at that. Um, Even their quick game, they're pretty much just running spot and stick concepts, but like out
Explain
of
spot.
so spot is like you'll have your number one receiver. Doesn't really matter which side. He'll run like a little kind of a hitch, like an angled hitch route, 5 yards in or whatever. You'll have a flat route going outside of him, and then you'll have usually a corner, but sometimes like a short post, kind of vertically stretching, so you can play those two routes. So that's spot. Some people will call it snag, depending on if there's the corner or not. It doesn't really matter. And then stick is you just run that like little 5 yard hitch route if you're getting zone coverage.
Oh, we know stick. Oh, we know stick
Stick.
on this
Yeah,
show. Don't
stick.
you
We
worry
can leave
about it.
it. But basically, they just run those two concepts out of like 100 different formations, but that's good, right? Like you're making it tough on the defense in terms of like what are we actually getting. But for the quarterback, it's the same read. It's the same read every time, and Fields has actually done well handling them. So I can't believe we're at the place that we're at with the Steelers offense, but it's been kind of cool to watch.
What's encouraging for me when watching Fields, and you and I talked about this a little bit earlier today, how quickly he's getting to checkdowns, right? We're not asking him to go 1 to 5 in these big pure progression looks. And I think that would be a pretty big departure from where he's been early in his career to ask him to be proficient at that right now. But him getting from 1 to 2 to check down or even 1 to check down consistently, that feels new. And it's led to him scrambling at just a way lower rate than we've ever seen from him before, right?
Absolutely. He was so 2 years ago in 2022, he had a 16.9% scramble rate, which was the highest in the league by a good margin. The year after that, in 2023, it wasn't that extreme, but he was top five. I think it was closer to like 12 or 13%. This year, on normal dropbacks, like without play action, without screens, he's 13th in scramble rate, which is, again, still like technically above average
But it's just
for
normal
but it's like
quarterbacking.
a normal, yeah. It's like I
Yeah.
think it's almost the same rate as like Patrick Mahomes. Like it's a very normal scramble rate. It's really the exact spot you want to be where it's like, okay, we're getting enough out of your athleticism that this is doing something, but you are clearly not relying on this to bail you out of every single problem. And that's really, I think, the most encouraging thing about all of this is, like you said, Fields is one. I think he's doing a much better and cleaner job of when his first read is there, he's just throwing it. Like he's not overthinking it. He's not taking an extra hitch. He is just ripping it.
And
And
they're
when
giving
it's
him a lot
not
of
there,
outside the numbers options to do that as well.
yes, absolutely. And he's really good at those throws. Like he
Yeah.
has the arm to do it. And so I
He's
think
ripping some quick outs, just
dude,
like ripping them when they're available to him. And again, that's just not the type of offense they were asking him to run over the last few years.
exactly. And that's why it's so weird. Like I didn't think that this is where we would arrive with what he's good at, but he actually is doing it well. And then, like you said, getting to the checkdowns. He used to in Chicago, it was 1, 2, bounce around for a second, I'm going to run. Now it's 1-2. I know where my tight end is right over the ball. Okay, I know where my back is out of the backfield. And he's just throwing it. He's not like waiting and looking at it and being like, is that open? Should I throw it? No, he's just doing it. And I think that that's one, a testament to him and some of the work that he's done. And then a testament to, I think, some of the ways that like Arthur Smith has gotten this into his head. Like, hey man, let's just run the offense. And I think it's from both sides been really encouraging.
The other side of things that I think has been really fun to watch, and we saw a little bit of this in Chicago, but I think it's been turned up a ton. His off schedule outside the pocket playmaking is better than it's ever been. We always knew what he could do as a runner, but I always was a little bit worried about his creativity as a thrower. He was a little bit robotic, and that was one of my biggest concerns about him. And in the pocket, I do think that is still somewhat of a concern. Like, right, he's not a twitchy player in the pocket necessarily. But when he's been outside of the pocket this year, watching some of the plays he's making on the move, I mean, he had like moving to his left, dropped arm angle, sidearm whip to George Pickens on a crosser last week where I was like, okay. I mean, like, not used to seeing that, but I'll absolutely take it. And then there was another one last week where there was an unblocked edge coming at him and he like bends the ball around him and gets a completion out of it. So seeing those little bits of creativity has been really fun. And I think some of that is confidence. Right. You can just see that he's playing with so much more confidence now than he was over the last couple of years. And I do think that, talking to people there, I think Arthur Smith is really enjoying working with him. And I think that their relationship has been good. And I think you can kind of feel the fact that that dynamic is a positive for that offense right now. And that's really cool to see for a guy that I think really kind of felt the weight of the world a little bit when he was in Chicago over the last couple of years. Seeing a guy who feels a little bit more unburdened in this second stint, I think that's been really nice.
The Pickens one is the one that really sold me. Where they're running stick to the left and they're getting Pickens from the right side on this deep back over to the left side. Fields goes, on his drop back 3 steps. He looks at the stick route. It's covered, and he doesn't waste any time. He immediately knows, okay, if my quick game concept is covered and I've got like deeper intermediate stuff to the other side, I've got to just move. So he immediately bails to his left, doesn't waste any time, and just makes this flick to Pickens. And it's like, that's the confidence that you're saying in like knowing what his answers are on a given play, and then some of the creativity and arm talent to go make that throw outside of the pocket. It's just the way that he's playing right now. It's what we've talked about with Sam Darnold or Baker or even Geno. It's like they're playing with a level of confidence and assuredness in who they are and what they can do that they just didn't have at previous stops.
That is fair to an extent. There are still a handful of plays every game.
He's not perfect.
Where he short circuits a little bit. The two that jump out to me from last week against Indy, he had a play where he's supposed to pick a side based on the coverage. If it's too high, he's supposed to go to the side with the double slants. It's wide open. The outside slant is wide open to Pickens. He picks the wrong side, hangs onto it, takes a sack. That's not disastrous, but it's a bad decision. There was one play though. They're in field goal range. The Colts bring a blitz off the right side. The slot corner is capped. You could see it coming from a million miles away. That's problem one. Two, he's got Connor Hayward right there. He turns around and gives him an option with him being hot, and he just eats it, runs 15 yards back, takes a miserable sack, and torpedoes the drive. There are fewer of those than there used to be, but we're still seeing them every so often.
That's the part of this where I think you can take whichever side you want. It's like it's almost a matter of like just how do you see it. It's like, oh well, he still has these plays and he's not going to be fixed. And I do think to some degree those plays are going to always be with him. But the fact to me that it's 2 of those plays a game instead of 6 or 7, that to me is what's more encouraging.
Let's get to the bad of all of this though, because like you mentioned, the run game, which we all thought would be good, has been really bad. They're 28th in rushing success rate. The first point I'll make about this, why aren't they running him more? Like they ran him on a design run like once last week against the Colts, and it was one of the best plays they had on the ground the entire game. And I think the other part of that is on those design quarterback runs, it's going to be a lot of gap scheme stuff. And I think gap scheme stuff is the way for them to go right now. Because one of the issues to me, the biggest issue with them running the football, especially early in that game against the Colts, on the zone stuff, you have to work in tandem with the guys next to you. You're working on combinations. It's all about timing. When do you come off of that? And when they're swapping out interior offensive linemen seemingly every single game, and it's hard to keep track of who's even in there, the Steelers starting guards right now, if you asked any casual football fan, there's a 0% chance that they would be able to name them. It's Mason McCormick as their starting left guard right now. He's a 4th-round pick this year. He's only in there because Salamalu's been hurt and multiple other people have been hurt. James Daniels gets hurt in the middle of that game against the Colts. And now Spencer Anderson, who was a 7th-round pick for them last year, has to come in at right guard. So anytime they're asked to do anything where it's a double team up to the linebacker, whatever, they're not getting to the second level ever. Those Colts linebackers are just flying around making plays the entire game. Combined with, and this is something I think that you can put on Arthur Smith a little bit, they got a lot of perimeter pressures in that game. Guys flying off the slot to make tackles for TFLs. I think that's something where fewer first down runs. Like you got to mix it up a little bit if you're going to be getting some of that stuff. So I think from a bunch of different angles, the run game just isn't what we expected it to be. And I think it's making things harder for this offense overall.
It absolutely is, and I'm glad you say that at the end, where it's making things harder for the offense overall. Because one, you're obviously just in a lot tougher down and distances, which we've said a lot for these teams who can't run the ball. It's also that when they brought in Fields and when they brought in Arthur Smith, it seemed like a big part of the formula was going to be, okay, we can run the ball and then we can do some of the play action stuff. Fields right now is 7th worst in success rate and 7th worst in EPA per dropback on under center play action. That was what they built this thing to do. And obviously, because Fields has been better at the other stuff, it's been fine and it hasn't been a huge problem. But this is what they built the offense to do, and they haven't been able to do it. I am still mostly of the opinion that it's just an offensive line issue. And I think if they can get the guys that they wanted to be out there from week 1 to be out there, I don't know, they're going to be an elite rushing offense, but they could certainly be much better than they are now. And that would have some sort of like trickle down effect here. But I just don't know when we're going to get everybody healthy and comfortable with each other.
The last bone I wanted to pick is with the personnel and some of the ways it's being deployed. And I think that we can probably trace why this is happening, but the amount of like vertical routes or like X receiver things they're asking Darnell Washington to do, I don't love it. Like, right. I almost want them to just try to build the whole plane out of throws to George Pickens because that's all they have. And I think that probably explains where our frustrations are coming from. This offense desperately needs another option at receiver. Like desperately needs one. It's Calvin Anderson, it's Calvin Austin, it's Van Jefferson right now. At whatever's happened with Roman Wilson, we haven't seen him yet pretty much at all. They need somebody across from Pickens so bad because what they're asking their tight ends to do, it's just a non-starter.
That's kind of the thing, is that putting Darnell Washington at X is more of like a morbid curiosity thing that's like interesting, but what are they supposed to do otherwise? Are they going to put Van Jefferson and ask him to go run all the big boy routes? Are you going to put like 5'7" Calvin Austin out there? Like, I just don't think they have a good answer. And so when Arthur Smith
I think I'd still probably rather see Van Jefferson doing that than George Pickens at this, or than Darnell Washington at this point.
Maybe, but I at least give Arthur Smith some credit of being like, I don't think Van Jefferson's going to do anything for us. Let's just see if the big man can go make a play.
So this brings us to the next thing I wanted to discuss. Davante Adams and Davante Adams' potential landing spots. The news about him wanting a trade came down after Dane and I finished recording on Tuesday, so we haven't really talked about this at all. The Steelers feel like a pretty logical destination for where he would make sense. They've got some financial flexibility. They've got a huge glaring up in lights need for another wide receiver. Your favorite Davante trade destination would be what?
I mean, in terms of teams that are realistic, and I certainly think the Steelers are, I think it is truthfully them. And I think going into the season, I probably wouldn't have said that just because of what I thought the structure of the offense was supposed to be and what I thought they were going to be good at. But with Fields kind of looking like a passable drop back passer right now, and I think if they added another guy, they would be even better there. And with the where the Steelers are at record wise, and like them actually having a chance to at least, certainly get into a wild card spot, and maybe even if the Ravens don't fully kick into gear, fight for the division, like, yeah, man, it would be kind of cool to have 2 pretty good receivers for Justin Fields in George Pickens and Davante Adams.
I get the Steelers thing. I think it does make sense. I think for where they are right now, it would be fun to drop him in. It's probably a 1-year thing no matter where he goes because he's due $35 million in base salary next year. So I wonder if the price is worth it for the Steelers. Like, do they see themselves as close enough where 1 year of Davante Adams is worth, I don't know, whatever the price ends up being. And the price is probably a moving target right now. We've heard it reported a bunch of different places that teams are calling essentially asking the Raiders, would you take on most of the salary if we bump up the trade compensation? So that changes the amount of teams that could potentially do this. And it would cost more to do that than it would to take it all on if you were a team like the Jets or a team like the Steelers that could potentially shoulder most of the financial load. The team that I keep coming back to, and it would be tough to thread the needle finance wise, is Buffalo, because
Oh,
I I do think this Bills team is probably closer than we thought they would be, and I think the AFC is a little bit more muddy than maybe we expected in what was supposed to be a slight step back for them. And we got our couple Keon Coleman moments last week, which I'm sure just you were elated about. But I still think as we look at this Bills offense, they could use one more guy. If you drop Davante Adams in there when they're in 11 personnel and we get less of Curtis Samuel or MVS or Mac Collins, all those guys, I do think that could just push this Bills offense just a smidge to where they need to be for this to be like a really serious contender type season for them.
this would kick them into supernova mode. Like I think they'll be fine regardless, but I think of all the Davante Adams landing spots, this would be the team that could be the best because he ends up there. And I don't even think it's an indictment of any of the other young guys they have there. Like Shakir is good, like Coleman is nice, but it's Davante Adams, dude. Like
It's just an
any team,
acceleration of the timeline. Like you're
yes.
fine operating on the timetable that you had coming into the season where it's like we're going to bring these guys along, we're going to see what they have. That's okay. But I do think that you're potentially close enough again when you consider the whole landscape of the AFC where something like this would be worth it. A couple things to consider. One, they have $3.5 million in cap space. We know that that can be fake, but if you go look at the Bills cap right now, I think they have like two guys on the entire roster who have a base salary that's more than $1.5 million. They've already maxed this credit card out, baby. Like I don't even know what the actual feasible path would be to getting $1.5 million in cap space or whatever you would need if they zeroed out Davante Adams in Vegas. The one part of this though, that's like, ooh, okay, this would actually be very clean and nice. They traded a second round. They got 2 2s for Stephon Diggs. So they have 2 2s in this draft. So what if you just called the Raiders and said, hey, you guys take on all of it, right? You zero it out, send him over here with a minimum base salary, and we will give you both of our second round picks next year for 12 games of Davante Adams. Do you do that if you're the Raiders?
If I'm the Raiders, man, I don't know. I almost think that you could somehow get a better offer than that. I mean, I know Devontae's old and it's a lot of money,
And it's a rental.
and it's a rental. I mean, maybe they won't get a first round pick for him because he's
I think
older
a
and
first
takes a
round
lot of
pick is
money. I
pretty
think that's probably
rich.
yeah, it's probably not happening. So I mean, 2 2s probably is as good as you're gonna get.
Do you do
I
that if
think
you're
you probably
Buffalo?
do. Oh, if you're Buffalo, absolutely. I don't even think you think about it. I think if you can get that situation and somehow fit him in the cap, you absolutely do it. Because what have we talked about this like entire first month of the season? Is that there aren't that many teams that we feel like I am certain this is a great team. Well, you go bring in Davante Adams, you're at least a lot closer to being one of those 2 or 3 teams that feels like a sure-handed great team. Maybe you do it.
We wanted to create a space on these shows, and this could apply to any show that we do. We wanted to create a space where we could try on some takes, right? We could trot them out there for judgment from the other person. So we're gonna call this segment the Take Tribunal, where you can trot out a take for the tribunal, and we get to say yay or nay. And by we, I mean the other person. So you have a thought about the Jets that when you uttered this in our like production call earlier in the week, I gasped because I thought it was so spicy. What is on your mind about this New York Jets team right now?
Yeah, so the New York Jets, if we all remember, they won 7 games last year. They went 7-10. I have convinced myself that they are not going to win more games than that this year. I think the vibes are rancid. I think the defense is not quite what they needed it to be. I don't think they're going to be the team that lands Davante Adams. And typically that part of the equation here would be too that the schedule's really hard. It's not. Like their schedule is pretty manageable. It's just I look at what I think this team is, and I think even their best game being against a Patriots team that like okay, you caught a young team on their first Thursday night ball, and Aaron Rodgers made plays outside the pocket that he hasn't made against any other team. They feel really fake right now, kind of flimsy. I don't like it.
If they win 7 games this year, It would be cataclysmic.
Oh, it's
You say
nightmare territory.
you saying this right now, there are gonna be Jets fans, like, pounding down your door with pitchforks and torches. What about the vibes has you this concerned about what's going on over there?
Jeez, I mean, where do you want to start? I mean, there was Rodgers having that weird like shove of Robert Sala that felt weird. I think on that Thursday night game, there was the argument. I mean, not argument. That's probably the wrong word, but disagreement they had about some of what
Disagreement is good,
Rodgers
yeah.
about what he was doing with his cadence in the Broncos game, because Rodgers has always been a guy, he wants to run the clock down, he wants to use his cadence to get an advantage, and he should. He's a 15-year veteran. He's done this for really he's like the free play god, right? He has been for as long as I've been watching football. So you should be able to do that. And Salah was like, maybe we could tone that down a little bit. And Aaron Rodgers said, well, that's one way to do it, or you could just have people, hold people accountable. And he's right. However, it's not great that you're that contentious already with your head coach. I think that's probably a bad spot to be in. Um, Another one after the Broncos game, Elijah Vera Tucker. So in that Broncos game, Aaron Rodgers was hit 14 times and sacked 5 times. And then after the game, Elijah Vera Tucker ends up saying, we played our asses off. And, in pass protection, you'll see it if you watch the tape. Maybe that's true, but it's hard to say that after a game where your quarterback gets sacked 5 times. And then there was even another quote from Garrett Wilson. Obviously, the Jets' offense has not been interesting the past couple of years without Aaron Rodgers, but he was talking about what the offense was this year and why it hasn't maybe been as explosive and as exciting as some people were hoping. And he said, I don't think we do a lot of different stuff, to be honest. I watch football on Sundays and I see a lot of teams mix it up and stuff like that. I don't think we do that. I think we
I
know
didn't
our
realize he said
identity.
that.
Yes, that is an exact quote, by the way. And then he continued and
Oh,
said,
man.
it's just about going and executing it or figuring out if it's going to work. I don't think we're trying a lot of different things. And so it seems like he thinks like this is just the identity of the team. And it kind of makes sense, right? Like Aaron Rodgers is very much a guy who he likes the things that he likes, and he's just going to hope that he's going to beat you pre-snap, hope that he can beat you with some of his cadence, hope that he can beat you with just getting the ball out fast. It's just I don't think they have enough to really make that formula work right now.
I'm going to support this take solely because I think it would be a fascinating sociological experiment. If the Jets go 7-10 and continue going down this path, watching it actually fits for Take Tribunal because it would be like watching an episode of Survivor. Like this really would be like a situation where we're just throwing people into the woods and letting the Lord of the Flies aspect of this take hold. Them playing the Broncos last week and the Vikings this week is the quickest possible path to short circuiting as a team and an offense, having to deal with those two defenses back-to-back weeks. They're flying to London to
Yes,
play
that's the other
Brian
part of it.
Flores in this Vikings team. If there is any scenario in which your nerves would just be completely frayed, this would be it. And so I'm just fascinated by this. I'm so glad. Sometimes I resent the London games just because it's early and I like to sleep because I'm getting old. I love the fact that this has its own island spot and we get to watch every single second of this game because I do think that self-destruction is, I think, probably overstating it. Like detonation is probably overstating it, but I do think that there's a lot on the table for what this could look like from the Jets' perspective against
There
this Vikings team specifically.
It's against this Vikings team in London. Like you said, you are going to fly a third of the way across the globe to have Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel smoke you 15 times. That is not good, man. That is not good for the brain.
You got the 6-hour flight home that just no one's going to be
Yes.
having a good time. I'm into this. I don't know if I totally agree. I do think that we've seen some holes with the offense, even though the Broncos defense we think is very good. The defense has been fine, right? I think they're like 8th in success rate, but you look at the teams that they've played over the last few weeks specifically. They played the Broncos and Bo Nix last week, which that's going to pump up your numbers anytime, and playing that team in a rainstorm. They played the Patriots the week before as the Patriots started to just disintegrate with their offensive line. And then they played the Will Levis Titans the week before that. The one like adult offense that they played against this year was the Niners, who absolutely stomped them. So
And
it's a good challenge this week.
and Levis actually looked okay until he got to the second half and made a couple of the, patented Will
Whoopsie
Levis
daisies.
plays. Yes, exactly.
All right, I'm into this. I'm actually really looking forward to that game. Speaking a couple other things that we're looking forward to. We did this last week, and I actually think it's a fun way to talk about a couple different matchups and just a couple different nuggets that are specific and a little bit esoteric. But we're calling this segment. This might only interest me, but mine for this week, the 49ers offense, their passing game specifically, is the bizarro version of itself. Like, I know that some people have alluded to this, but I'm really excited to see where they ultimately take this. I want to read some stats for you about what the Niners passing game has felt like this year. This season, Brock Purdy is second in the NFL in air yards per attempt, behind only Anthony Richardson, who is doing a very different thing than everybody else. He is dead last in expected completion percentage, which is a next gen stat just about separation and how far you're pushing the ball downfield. So, on average, when Brock Purdy throws the ball, they are the hardest throws in football right now. That extends to his tight window percentage, which right now only Dak Prescott is throwing into tight windows more often than Brock Purdy. 24.6% of Purdy's throws are into tight windows. Last year was 12.8%. So, we're talking about roughly half. That extends to several more categories. 26% of his passing yards are coming from yak right now. Last year, it was 49.5%. It's dead last in the league, by the way. 7.4% of his throws are behind the line of scrimmage right now. Dead last in the league. Last year, it was 15%. So watching what he's trying to do, I'm actually really enjoying it just from like a pure, all right, fuck it, YOLO, just chuck it downfield. I'll take this. The amount of alerts that he's taking, the amount of 50-50 balls that he's throwing, it's actually a very entertaining product that they're putting on the field. I just don't necessarily know what to make of it in terms of the root causes and whether or not this is ultimately a good thing for the Niners offense moving forward. I don't know where I land on either of those things.
I'm trying to think of which part of it I want to dissect first. I'll start with whether or not it's a good whether or not it is a good thing. I think the rate at which they're doing some of these things is probably not fully sustainable. However, I think it is very good for the offense that Purdy has really become one of the most honorable and aggressive quarterbacks
I
in the
like
league.
this.
Like,
Yeah.
he is, like you said, he will throw some of those alerts. The one that he threw to Juwan Jennings in this last game, he threw another one to Debo. Some of the willingness that he will just like throw a dig route into triple coverage. I mean, not like actually like at three defenders, but fitting it into those windows. Like, he just
The
has a
Kittle
willingness.
touchdown was at three
That one
defenders.
literally was at three to people. But even that, he puts in a good spot where he knows Kittle can go up and get it. And so I think he's done really good with that. And then I think on like third down and pressure downs, I think he actually has gotten better at understanding how to stand in the pocket and get to where he needs to be to make some of those throws under duress. And then you add that on top of the fact that he really gives these guys chances to make tough catches. But you know what? They're good at it.
Yeah, they've
George
been
Kittle can go find the
monsters.
ball. Yes, like Brandon Ayuk can go find the ball. Jawan Jennings, the way that he tracked that post route that Purdy threw to him, and it was a really good ball into tight coverage. I don't want to take anything away from Purdy, but because it was like tight and good coverage, Jennings has to like kind of find it over the defender and like over his back, and he just finds it so well. And it's like, man, if Purdy is going to give all these guys chances and they're going to continue to capitalize, again, maybe they don't capitalize at quite this rate for the rest of the season, but this is the right way to attack it when you have these kinds of players. So I think
I'm with you on
overall
this,
it's
by the
good for
way.
them.
I
Yeah,
actually do think that is a good thing. And I actually do think that the level of ambition and what he's trying to pull off is ultimately good. And it's fun to watch him. Like, I'm
it is.
enjoying this version of him. I think that he's playing at a high level. And the fact that he's trying to get away with some of this stuff as we've turned into like a league full of check down Charlies, I'm enjoying it. Like, it's very much going against the grain of what the NFL feels like for the most part.
This is how you have to play. You either have to be the most efficient quick game passing team in the league, which like if they had Christian McCaffrey in the lineup again, maybe they could be that. But it's either that or do what Jordan Love was trying to do, or what Purdy has been trying to do, or what Anthony Richardson is doing. And it's like, yeah, dude, throw 15 yards down the field every play, and let's see if we can hit some explosives. And Purdy has very much bought into that style of play.
What's yours for this week? What is the thing that might only interest you as you look ahead to week 5?
The Browns defense is a very, very different test for Jayden Daniels from what he has gotten for basically the entirety of the season. Because
I
one,
absolutely love this.
it's not even just quality of defense, although that is part of it. The Browns are not the elite defense they were last year, but they're an above average defense and they've been solid. Their pass rush is still incredible. It's that Washington has played some of the worst defenses in the league over the course of the season. Like the best one they've played is probably the Giants, and they're okay at best, and every other defense they played is like bottom six. So I think that is certainly part of it. It's also that the Browns just play in a very particular way. They are a team that wants to rush with four a lot, and they have the fifth highest pressure rate when they do. They're a team that wants to play cover one a lot. They run cover one at about a 40% clip, which is the highest in the league at this point. And they do it generally fairly well. And I say that with a caveat. In terms of completion percentage allowed, they have the third lowest in the league right now, 46%. So like they are making these windows tight and really doing a good job of making you earn it. It's just that when they get beat, they give up explosives. And so that's really going to be the demand on a guy like Jayden Daniels. It's like, okay, can you make some of these tight window throws and get some explosives to Terry McLaurin or Luke McCaffrey or whoever it is? And I just think that that's a much different ask than he's had for most of this season.
I think this is notable because if you look at some of the numbers, you talk about tight window throws. Here are the guys who have thrown into tight windows on a lower percentage of their attempts so far this year. Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Caleb Williams, Trevor Lawrence, Tua. That's it. So Jayden Daniels has been working with a lot of it's decision making is part of that, right? Like he's just
Oh,
going to the
certainly.
right guy very consistently. But I also think that the amount of separation and the space that they're building into this offense and the amount of zone heavy defenses that they played against, that goes into it. He's faced cover one at the seventh lowest rate in the league. So this is going to be a very different challenge on multiple different levels. The version of the Bengals that he saw is the worst pass rusher in the league, probably, with even with Trey Hendrickson. And the Cardinals, no matter what version, even with all their guys healthy, or most of them, I know BJ Ojulari is hurt and Darius Robinson's hurt, whatever. But the current version of the Cardinals, guys not on IR, they are the worst pass rusher in the league. So this is going to be a very different beast. And I'm not even like skeptical that he can do it. I'm
No,
just
neither am
curious to
I.
see what it looks like.
That is exactly how I want to frame it. Like he's checked every box to this point, so I'm not saying, "Oh, this Browns defense is going to get him." It's just that this is the toughest test that he's facing. It's a very different test, and so I'm genuinely curious to see how he handles it and how it plays out.
As soon as you sent this as your answer to this question, I was walking through the airport and I was like, "Fuck yeah!" Like that is that is so perfect because it's exactly the type of thing that I am so curious to see how it plays out. So
Oh,
that's a great one.
and I've got one more thing on it. So far, the Browns have only allowed 7 scrambles this season. You know who has scrambled the most of any quarterback in the NFL? It's Jayden Daniels. So
Why do
there's
we
going to
think that
be,
is? Because when you play all that man, don't you think teams would scramble?
and they've played guys who can move a little bit. Like they've played Dak Prescott, Trevor Lawrence, Gardner Minshew, Daniel Jones. These are guys who typically are willing to move. I just think that because they do such a good job of crushing the pocket with some
Yeah,
of their
that makes
guys,
sense.
I
Yeah.
think that's what a majority of it is. And like Myles Garrett has really become a very smart rusher where he doesn't allow the quarterback many opportunities to get around him. And so I think that plays a big part of it. Daniels will certainly probably scramble more than the other quarterbacks have gotten away from or gotten away with against this team, but I don't know if it'll be as much as he's typically gotten away with the past month.
All right, let's wrap this up the same way we finished up all of these weekly preview shows. What is one thing you want to know by the time the week 5 games wrap up this weekend?
So the Cardinals play the 49ers this weekend. One of the Cardinals offense or the San Francisco 49ers defense, one of them has to grow up and be the unit I think that they're supposed to be.
You're
And
not
I think
believing what happened against the Patriots last week for the Niners
no,
defense?
that's not a good enough test for me. You've got to do it against a not bottom five offense. And so, and then for the Cardinals, they looked good the first 2 weeks, haven't looked great the past couple of weeks. So, and they really haven't looked good off of their script, which I think is another thing that's interesting with them. So, I just want to see which one of these units can kind of figure it out a little bit.
I like this one because I just don't think I have a very good handle on the Niners right now. And I think just spending a little bit more time considering where they're at and are they quite the team we thought they would be. I think this is a decent test for us to get a little bit more information on that. They obviously crushed the Jets. They had that weird game against the Vikings. So very curious to see how it goes against Arizona. For mine, I don't even know how strongly I feel about this one, but it's mostly because if they win this game, they're 3-2. And if you look at the middle of the AFC, 3-2 would actually put you in a pretty good spot to be in the wild card conversation. That's the Indianapolis Colts. Like, are the Colts serious? Are they a serious football team? Are they like a playoff caliber sneak into the wild card football team? I want to
Where
know.
where are you leaning on like a 60-40, 55-45? Like which direction are we kind of leaning here?
I think I'm leaning no,
How
but
strongly?
I'm leaning no from like the product they're putting on the field. But from
Okay.
a wins and losses perspective, they're playing a Jags team that is completely reeling right now this weekend. And I think that's why this is a good test. If you can beat the Jags, if you don't have to blow them out, but if you are a convincingly better team than the 2024 Jacksonville Jaguars right now, that's what I would want to see from this Colts team. I have my concerns. We've talked so much about the Anthony Richardson of all of this and some of the struggles he's had, him staying on the field, him staying healthy. Everything else about the offense right now, even if Jonathan Taylor's a little bit banged up, I feel pretty good about it. The offensive line is good. The offensive line is objectively good. They dropped Josh Downs back in last week. And so now you got Downs and Pittman and Mitchell. And it's like, okay, we're cooking a little bit there. So if they can get something out of Sermon in the meantime until Taylor gets back, and we see Anthony Richardson start to take a couple steps forward, plays like the way he did on that first drive last week, and he's healthy, I actually do feel okay about that. I'm deeply concerned about the defense. Like,
Yeah.
deeply concerned about the defense. Coming into the year, we were worried about what their secondary would look like. That's when they were healthy. I'm not going to say his name because it's not important. The backup nickel for the Colts had his issues last week. Kenny Moore needs to get back into that lineup very, very fast. And that's beyond some of the injuries they're dealing with their outside corners. DeForest Buckner's banged up. So I think they're going to be holding on for dear life a little bit off defensively for most of this year. But if the offense can find itself and Richardson can kind of stabilize, the play that we've seen from him, where the flashes show up a little bit more often and it just becomes a little bit less volatile, I am still intrigued about the offense. So I think this week against the Jags, a Jags team that they should beat based on everything that's going on right now, I think that's kind of going to, maybe we take a step forward toward the answer.
Isn't that kind of like the entire like mantra around the Colts is that it's not been as good as I wanted it to be, but I still believe kind of. Like that's how we feel about the quarterback. That's where we're at with the offense overall right now. Like it's just kind of what they are.
When I say they should beat the Jags are 2.5-point favorites, but like this is a fairly even matchup. They're on the road and the Jags are 2.5-point favorites. So what do you look like against this Jags team? Should beat is probably strong, but I think that the state of the Jacksonville Jaguars is probably a pretty good mirror for where, like, to get a sense of where you are if you're the Colts. So that's what I'm paying attention to. Last thing I wanted to mention before we wrap this up, your voicemails, we still are going to get to them. I think the plan is we're going to move those to the midweek show. And we're going to transition this more into it's your grievances with everything. We're just going to let you kind of spill your guts on these voicemails, but everything that you're dealing with. And then we're going to talk through some of that stuff with you guys, with whoever is on the midweek show. So continue to call in, continue to give us those. We're going to transition those to the midweek show just when we have fewer things to get to, honestly. Like these preview shows get really slammed. We have the Thursday night recap. So we want to get to it. We're just trying to find the best spot for it. And I think those Tuesday and Wednesday shows are probably the best answer. So sorry we have not gotten to those over the last couple weeks, but we do plan on doing that at some point. For now, that is all we've got. We will be back on Sunday night with our normal Sunday night recap live on YouTube if that's where you guys want to join us. For now, that's all we got. Appreciate you guys listening. We'll talk to you soon.